This is Berkeley. This is higher ed. We love frameworks. We love structure. We love going in there with a lesson plan and learning objectives and laying it all out there. And what we found is what they get the most value out of is just socializing with each other. All of the conversations that they will have that are important happen organically once they build a relationship and build trust and communication with other people. When they break down and see each other as a peer group, a community, then we can slide in there and kind of sprinkle in some of these other things about, cultural differences and how to deal with cross-cultural conflict. But you can't do any of that until you kind of build the community first.
Hi, it's Morgane Michael, and this is Hindsight 101, where you're going to get practical strategies for designing a life that inspires you, one life edit at a time. Hello, and welcome to Hindsight 101 with me, your host, Morgane Michael, and I'm here with Shaun Carver, and he is the Executive Director of UC Berkeley's International House. And so I'm so excited today to be speaking to him about how do we bring people together, specifically when we feel so vastly different in terms of our political ideology and some of our overarching beliefs around many of those hot button topics. So, Shaun, I'm so excited to have you here today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to talk to your audience.
Great. So tell me a little bit about your background, just so that we can get a sense of who it is that you are. I mean, you do some incredible leadership work in a very prominent area. And so just give the audience a little bit of background so that we can understand some of your expertise, if you would.
Yeah, I think higher ed was kind of my second career. Early on, I was in electronics industry. And once I finished my MBA, I got into teaching and just really loved being in the classroom, interacting with the students, sharing my experiences, supporting their dreams, especially in being in business school. A lot of these people want to be entrepreneurs. And so it's really exciting to work with them. I had the opportunity to go to China for 1 year to teach in a program in Beijing, which ended up being 13 years in China.
Oh, wow.
Both in higher ed and international higher ed. And from there, I went to an international business school called HULT that moved me to Boston. I went back to UC San Diego at business school at UC San Diego, and then had the opportunity to come up here to International House. And just my international exposure, being around different cultures, seeing the magic that happens when you have really diverse communities kind of come together. You think it's just going to be all chaos and conflict. And what I found in my time in China and since has been quite the opposite. There's really some beautiful magic that happens when you have these really diverse communities coming together.
I can imagine. And I know, I live in Canada, but whether we are based in the United States, which is where I do a lot of my speaking work, or, anywhere really internationally, we know that there are so many different opinions when it comes to our political ideology and our religion and some of the big topics that we confront day to day, whether we're in schools or we're in, higher level education like you are, or in our hospitals. This is really a big issue. And many people choose not to touch on any of these topics at all because they are so sensitive. I know right now we've just had a recent election in the US, and obviously that's been on many people's minds. Even up here in Canada, it's been something that has been certainly high on the conversation docket for sure. And I think there's some apprehension around just the political divide, because obviously there are some people who have particular, opinions around supporting the Trump administration, and then others who don't agree with a lot of the policies and frameworks that are going to be coming through. And so knowing what we know about just that divide, how can we navigate that, let's say within a school type environment? Because we have many stakeholders. We have educators, we have students at various different, age levels who understand different layers of, political tension. But then we also have, administrators, and we have parents, and we have all these different people who mingle and have different opinions. So what do we do?
Yeah. So let me introduce a little bit about what iHouse is and how, why I can even talk about this topic, right? So we house, for over 100 years, International House has existed. There's the original one is in Columbia near Columbia University in New York. We're in Berkeley. There's one in Chicago, at the University of Chicago. And what we do is we bring 620 students together, undergrad, grad, from around the world. And so in the 620, we have about 16% are domestic students, and then the other 84 are international students. And so out of this 624, we have 82 nationalities in this house. And so even when you talk, well, the biggest group is Americans, right? There's a lot of diversity within the group of Americans. And as you go around the world, you'll find that just because someone has the same color passport as somebody else, they have different views, they can have different religions, different values. And so when you look at our community, it is hyper diverse. I mean, we have not just the 82 nationalities but we have diversity across gender, across economics, across religion. I mean, every way that you can sort out and divide people, it's in this house. And so potentially, it could be just all conflict, people arguing, fighting with each other. But that's not what we see. What we see is they come to this community, and our purpose is to bring people together to understand each other. Sit down at our dining room. We have, we do 19 meals a week. So they live here, they eat here, they study here. We do programming with them. But the whole goal is to get them to see each other as people and try to have conversations and deepen their understanding of different people, and see each other as friends with differences versus us versus them, which is what we see a lot. So it really is magic to see this work, because while they can be on campus protesting, they come back to iHouse and they're nice to each other. While there are people who are literally at war with each other living in this house together, the conflict doesn't come into the house. They see each other as a community.
Wow.
That's really special, right? And I think, over 100 years, the world has gotten smaller. It seems to be getting bigger as we're dividing ourselves up and separating each other and pushing people out of our comfort zones. But what we do is I think magical, and it works. I think there's a view right now that, diversity, having diverse viewpoints is wrong.
Right.
There's a right and a wrong, and if you're not on the right side, you're out.
Yeah.
And we don't see it that way. We're a nonprofit organization. We're apolitical. Trump, Biden, Harris, it makes no difference to me. Certainly as an individual, it matters, right? I mean, I vote and I have an opinion.
Sure.
That's not what the institution is about. The institution is about looking beyond those labels and to sit down with someone and have a conversation, and learn and try to understand and find common ground.
This is so good. And what you say makes me think of that quote. I think it's a Brene Brown quote that says it's hard to hate people up close. And that idea, what you said, friends with differences, if we look at ourselves that way and we look at one another that way, that they're, so much of what happens because we dehumanize people. And so that act of being able to find common ground, where at the very least in this particular organization, you're able to find the humanity within each other, is really beautiful. And I think what would be at top of mind for a lot of people would be like, but how do you do that? How do you do that? Right. Tactically.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think part of it is that the institution that iHouse has been around for 100 years. Mm-hmm. We have been apolitical. We have never taken a side. How can I look at any conflict in the world and take a side when I have residents in the house from the side I'm taking against, right? So what does that tell them? You're not welcome, or we don't value your opinion. You can't talk about your viewpoints in this house. Mm-hmm. We couldn't survive that way. That wouldn't be, our mission isn't to people to agree. Our mission is to understand. And that means we need diversity. We need critical thinkers, people who can, look at one view, look at the other, and form their own opinion. I did a piece a month or so ago, kind of higher education or indoctrination, that, a lot of these classroom environments don't encourage people with a counterpoint to talk. They're labeled or shut down, and people self-censor themselves in these classroom environments. And because they're seen as, my view is wrong, right? And that's a challenge. Critical thinkers should understand these issues are not black and white, that there's value in listening to people you disagree with, trying to understand their position, not agree, but just understand their position, and then form your opinions. And we,
Yeah,
we seem to be afraid to listen to people who disagree with us right now, which is not healthy.
I agree. I think that there is, the cancel culture on both ends, which ends up cycling back and both, whether you're canceling because maybe someone isn't liberal enough or you're canceling because they're too, restrictive and have particular viewpoints that don't link up with yours. I think at the end of the day, yeah, it's problematic. And then we're not able to find, I mean, I just interviewed someone named Derek Sivers, and he's sort of a business guy, but he's also a philosopher, right? He really thinks deeply. He's quite well known. And he talked about this idea of useful but not true. And so he says, sometimes in this world, we attach ourselves so readily to things that appear to be true to us, and really they're so subjective. And so we place these truths or these sort of absolutes on things that are so based on experience, context, all of these nuances. But when we drill them down to the lead line in, a newspaper article, well, it sways one way or the other. And people, I think, naturally want to, even from I teach kindergarten, and even from that age, there is sort of a black and white perspective that we tend toward. And so how do you guard against that? Or how do we uncouple ourselves from that narrative of everything having to be right or wrong?
Yeah, that's the challenge. We used to be more civil, right, with each other. And so we've lost civility.
Yes.
Having a deep understanding of a topic, whatever it is, right, to really try to understand the complexity of an issue in the Middle East or a conflict between countries or religions, it takes work. You got to go out and read, right, and find people to listen to and try to understand the history, the context, why people disagree with each other. And I think, I don't want to use the word lazy because I don't think that's fair.
Right.
We tend to get our information in small bites. Social media keeps sending us kind of the same message over and over again. We haven't monetized how to get social media feeds to give you diverse opinions, right?
Yeah.
It takes you down whatever you're going to stare out longest, which tends to be the most outrageous, the most, they're just going to keep feeding you that to get your eyes on the screen. And I think that it creates a world of just right and wrong. So we need to step back from all of that a bit. And it's really sad to see people that have really strong opinions about some of the things that are going on in the world today, but have no understanding of the history or the context of how we got here. And that's, we need to get back to that where I used to be reading the paper, right? You sit in the morning and read the paper. Who reads the paper anymore? You're reading, 40 words, tweets.
Yeah.
And trying to get everything in context out of that. And it's just not, it's just something we need to figure out how to do better with today's technology. And then how we get information. And even, I was making a comment to one of my board members the other day. I was like, yeah, I don't remember, dating myself or like watching Walter Cronkite or Tom Brokaw on the news every night. I never really got a sense whether they're a Democrat or
Right.
Republican.
Yeah.
The stations now have clearly picked a side and are providing only information. And, that they're just becoming commentary instead of, giving you news, giving you facts, letting you form your own opinions. And we need to step back from that a little bit, I think.
I think so too. And I think, like you said, that whole idea of civility is maybe not dead, but it's certainly not at the forefront. Like, I think this idea of like authenticity and showing up as your full self and like you said, funneling all of our information into whatever it is that particularly interests us. Well, that's fine. But at the end of the day, we're not really getting a very diverse funnel of information. We're getting a very particular message again and again and again. How can it, when we bring this back to sort of a practical approach, what are some of the frameworks or approaches that I gather you probably work with other organizations to build this, or even within the context of the International House? What are some of the frameworks that you use as you set out to introduce folks to each other, to build community? I'm guessing that there must be some kind of an approach, and how would you go about doing that?
Yeah, like so, education, it's
Yeah.
rinse and repeat every 12 months. You tend to do the same thing over and over again, right?
Yeah.
And we've been doing this formula for, like I said, like 100 years.
Yes.
And we've gone, the whole spectrum of how do we deal with this? And this is Berkeley, this is higher ed. We love frameworks, we love structure, we love going in there with a lesson plan and learning objectives and laying it all out there. And what we found is what they get the most value out of is just socializing with each other. All of the conversations that they will have that are important happen organically once they build a relationship and build trust and communication with other people. When they break down and see each other as peer group, a community, then we can slide in there and kind of sprinkle in some of these other things about, cultural differences and how to deal with cross-cultural conflict. But you can't do any of that until you kind of build the community first. And like a lot of, schools, every 12 months, we essentially have a brand new cohort. And so sometimes it's hard to keep things rolling year after year because it's just a new community that, you teach kindergarten. Every class has a personality.
Is burnout, overwhelm, and low motivation holding your team back? Well, I help people like you in education, the corporate world, and in healthcare to regain a sense of themselves through simple life edits. All you have to do to transform your team is contact me for your next workshop or keynote.
Absolutely. Yes, I always say that too. I say it's almost like it becomes it's not a beast, but it's like it does have its own entity as a being almost on its own. And if you have certain variables that are different, aka people are absent any given day, then it shifts the overall sort of personality of that particular entity. One of the things that has come up, I'd say, particularly in my area, but also I'd say, into the US where I do a lot of speaking, is that there are some challenging, we have kids coming in from the Ukraine who have had extreme, very, very challenging trauma, war experience. They've had families who have had absolute heinous things happen to them right before their eyes. We have students who come from, just various countries in, East Africa, West Africa, and just the standard of life for them has been so different. And that shift, that cultural shift is significant. And what our school system looks like versus what, say, even in like Nigeria. I have a family from Nigeria, and I sat down, the mom's doing her PhD in law at our local university, sat down, had a conversation, and just was really curious and just wanted to have a very open conversation about what does it look like and what does it feel like for you right now, and how are things going. And she was really open about the fact, she's like, we do our research differently in Africa, in Nigeria, than we do here. And so I have, as a student learner myself, as doing my PhD, I've had to shift things, and it's been challenging. And she says, I don't feel like I belong. I feel like I'm on the outside right now, and it's tough. That's a tough hurdle. And then she said, and my students have come from a very, very rigid school experience in Nigeria. And then they come here, and she said, it's just like playtime here, And so it's just, it was actually a beautiful conversation to have, to be able to open and to sort of talk about some of the significant differences, because then we have a starting point. Because I think what can happen, and the tricky thing is when we make assumptions about the behaviors that we see, and that maybe otherness, it presents as different, and we make assumptions and then we act based on those beliefs and assumptions, well, that's where it gets into trouble. And that's when we can, do damage, and we don't want to do that. And advice for school districts kind of facing significant, influx of people who are maybe experiencing very different cultural experiences than many of us are. What do we do,
Yeah, I experienced that when I went to China, dealing with Chinese learners primarily at the beginning. And, they were doing dual degree programs. So part of the program was in China. Then they'd go to the US or the UK, Australia, Canada to do the rest of their degree. And, what you would see was, gosh, in the Chinese system, those students were extremely strong.
Mm-hmm.
the style of education isn't teaching critical thinking and, um, read this article, form your own opinion and write an art, support your view. It was, there's a right and a wrong, and, it's rote learning. It's read and regurgitate on a test. It's memorization. And there were students who excelled in that learning environment. And then you move them into the United States classroom, which is completely different. And there's people talking and arguing with the professor and challenging the professor's view on things.
Yeah.
And it is just a whole different skill group.
Yeah.
That you need to be successful. I used to equate it to like being a chef. Like, you could be a great chef in a Chinese kitchen. You could be a great chef in a French kitchen. Not always do those skills translate into the other. And so, similar, you can be a great student in an environment because the culture and the system is designed to teach you how to learn in a certain way. And it's not always transferable. And I think a lot of the challenge with these schools is that you're getting groups that have, this was just China and the US, but then you throw in Nigeria, or you throw in Eastern Europe, or South America, and you've got all of these people that don't have the same learning skills that we're doing in our classrooms. And so, then there's a lot of cultural differences that come out, and challenges that each of these students have. And I can't tell you what the budget looks like when you try to address them individually, right? So,
this is like nailing it on the head, because I think every educator that I talk to is like, wonderful, we love diversity, that's great. And then, when we think structurally and systematically, the wheels are kind of falling off the bus,
Yeah.
And I think we're not able to meet students where they're at when they're coming from such a significantly different environment. And then that has its own repercussions. We want to, I think, but there's sort of that difficulty piece. So my wondering is systemically, how can we address this a little bit more up the creek, if that makes sense? Can we actually start anticipating that there might be some issues that have come up in the past, and creating, connecting those dots a little bit so that we can prepare people like, okay, let's get a little bit of background on particular families, of course, but then also here's the tendency in terms of values when it comes to education for particular areas. And I don't know, that's probably a very nuanced and very, very difficult process, because, of course there would be missteps. There would be, maybe we assume too much about a particular trend or a generalization, and that could be very difficult. But I just don't know. I look at it and I'm like, things are kind of a little bit off when it comes to this. And how do we fix that?
Yeah, I'm a little, I won't say a little fortunate. I'm fortunate. I mean, one, I'm dealing with essentially adults, right?
Yeah.
And so, not kindergartens or K through 12. And also, they self-select to be here. So they choose this environment because they feel comfortable in it. When I've seen residents struggle, it's generally they chose iHouse because they want to be close to campus and they heard we have good food. Then they get here and then they're surrounded by all these different opinions and people challenging them and questioning them. And if they are a fixed mindset person, I love the growth mindset book. If they're a fixed mindset person and they've got all of this comfort zone around them, it can be really challenging to be here. But most people aren't. Most people come here because they want to be surrounded by all of this diversity and they want to learn about others. They're curious to know how other people, a lot of what you're talking about in the group that you work with, they're not self-selecting into these schools. They're being placed into these schools. And so that creates a little bit more of a challenge with, my community kind of builds itself because they know what they're getting into. But public education, a lot of they're just in the school because they're in the school. And, the schools have their own cultures and they may be strong because they have a demographic group in the school that is big enough that they've learned how to work and support those students. But you bring one student in from Ghana, and the school doesn't have any experience, right, or anybody who specializes in that in that area.
And
No,
I
I
think
think it's
that's
really challenging.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly it. I think there could be a way to approach it, but I think we need to be a little bit more aware that this is a systemic issue and it's not school by school, it's not student by student. It is really something, like you said, you end up pouring a ton of resources in at the individual level, and it doesn't always work. But
Well, when we were in China, I ran a school, started a school in China for 5 years, and we were
Mm,
doing a lot of this, which was really doing a foundation year with high school seniors. So they would take a year, and we would put them through. They would take college level classes, but we would also try to do the teaching skills, teach them the learning skills that they would need to be successful in a U.S. or UK classroom, teaching them critical thinking, which was not something that was part of their education in the past, but critical to be successful in a different environment.
absolutely.
Um, teaching them to be active participants in a classroom. Which again, for 12 years, they've been told, you don't raise your hand, you don't ask questions, you sit
Yeah.
there, you listen, you write, you know.
Yeah.
So raising your hand, asking questions is just not something they're comfortable with. So we have to teach them those things so that they could, take their Chinese cooking skills and apply it in the French kitchen, right?
Right.
So, that's something that I think gets overlooked a bit, is teaching them the skills to be successful. And then all
Okay.
the other things about, like you said, the othering of, you have, these, I have a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old. So my son is still in elementary school. My daughter's in junior high now, which is another experience. But, I see how these classroom communities can be, they're still figuring life out, right? So they're
Hmm.
they're cliquey. They're not always the most welcoming to new students. There's a lot of us and them and differences. It just the world you deal with is very challenging with those groups, as they're trying to learn social skills, right? Community building and things.
Yes, exactly. That's it. Can you share sort of an anecdote or a time when, you saw a shift in the way that a particular student felt a sense of cohesion within the group that you lead? Like, have you seen kind of that shift or that transformation?
Yeah, it happens all the time. More so than I probably think. There's 600 of them. I try to get out there and meet as many as I can, and generally, if you're in my office, it's for really good reasons or really bad reasons. So I kind of see the extremes a lot. But it's there's if you go into our Hall of History, there's a really great write up from one of our South African students, and this was during at the end of apartheid. So she tells the story of how she came to iHouse as a South African student. And there was another resident here who was a Zulu from South Africa. And she talks about how in their home country, they would have talked to each other. They're just separated in every way possible and would never. And they met every Wednesday night. We have a coffee hour where, a group of kids from a group of residents from a country will come together and they'll celebrate their country. They'll share food, snacks, music, all of that.
Neat.
And so they met at a coffee hour, and it started a conversation. They ended up going to the movies together. And she talks, as she was leaving, he was staying to continue his degree and she was going back home. And he wrote this really, really touching letter about why did it take us to come all the way to Berkeley to meet each other and to form a friendship. And our history, our 100-year history, is just filled of situations where people are, for various reasons, separated from each other. And then when they come here, they come together and they realize it's a person. It's not a label. It's not them. It's one of us. And when it comes down to it, we're all looking for, health, safety, an opportunity for a better life. And if you start on that context and sit down at our dining table and start having conversations we're all starting at that place, you really helps understanding. And we believe makes the world a more peaceful place. It's okay to disagree. And I understand why we disagree. And I understand why I don't agree with you, but I understand why you feel that way. And I want to make sure you understand how that makes me feel. And, these really healthy conversations and really deep relationships form.
I love that. Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. And I think really important to remember that sometimes it isn't necessarily about specific strategies, as you say, or necessarily a tactical framework and roadmap, but really just, can we listen to each other? Can we be open-minded? Can we, as you said, use sort of a growth mindset to approach something new instead of with reticence, like actually be open to what that might do for ourselves, for our growth, for our overall transformation. If you were to sort of leave people with a message or something to sort of keep in mind as they navigate either, differences in their own life or challenges, with the people that they may not agree with, or maybe at work, what would you say to them?
I'll give people a chance, assume that most people have good intentions. And if they say something that offends you, don't always be quick to interpret that as hate speech. And we just did a free speech survey in the house. And one of the things that came out was that our residents really want a clear definition of offensive speech versus hate speech. Hate speech, there's no place for that. Offensive speech is okay. If I say something that offends you, it's not, most of the time we don't do it intentionally. And it's an opportunity to have a discussion, right? Why does it offend you? And help me understand what I did so that I can make corrections and not offend you in the future. And I think we're just so quick to judge and so quick to take offense and classify everything as, bad intentions. This is hate speech, but we all make mistakes, and what we need is feedback to understand how we can all get better. And I think a little bit thicker skin on with folks. Clearly there's hate speech. Clearly there's things that, should not be said, and people should be, that should be dealt with.
Sure.
But a lot more of it is just misunderstanding, miscommunication. And I think there's opportunities for us to build on those opportunities, and build relationships and not try to cancel folks or, exclude folks from our community. None of us are perfect. None of us do it, but I think most of us have good intentions.
I agree. And I really like that distinction between offensive speech and then hate speech, because obviously there are times when people may be, if they disagree, may feel offended by something that someone else said. It doesn't necessarily mean that it warrants cancellation. So I think that's huge. That conversation is where we will learn the most versus simply typecasting someone as wrong.
Well, think about this house, 620 residents, 80 different nationalities, all of this diversity. If I didn't have a very strong free speech policy here, if I started trimming that down and saying free speech except for those people, or free speech for people except for people, pretty soon I start pushing people out of this community. And how does that help anybody, right? We need to welcome those people who we disagree with and understand that, some of these topics that we're dealing with the Middle East or in Ukraine and Russia or even in Africa, the conflict going on in Africa, there's many sides to these things, and they're all represented in my house.
Right.
And if I start taking a side, pretty soon I won't have 82 countries. I'm going to have 25 developed countries.
Right.
And that's not healthy, right? And that's not what we want to be.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. So, Shaun, where can people find you? Tell me some of the services and what you're hoping to get from folks here.
People all I want is a network of folks that we can talk and share. And, I think we have a little bit of secret sauce here. We've learned a lot over our 100 years. There are other iHouses around there that are doing similar things that have equal success. And just, building a community and getting the word out there that diversity works. We shouldn't be separating each other and saying we're against diversity. We're against including people. We want to be exclusive. Not welcoming international folks into our education system, which brings so much into the classroom and into our society and into our economies that the current rhetoric is not great. So reach out to me on LinkedIn, start a conversation. I'd love it. And build a network of folks that want to do good work.
Amazing. Well, Shaun, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. And yes, reach out to Shaun Carver on LinkedIn and follow up. And I'm sure they can check in on the UC Berkeley International House as well.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. This has been a pleasure.
No, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Kindsight 101 with me, your host, Morgane Michael. It has been an absolute pleasure. I always learn so much, but really, I want to hear what you've learned. Please find me on social media by searching Morgane Michael and reach out. I always love to hear from people.